everyone. I'm Juan Carlos Rodriguez. For years, my life revolved around putting my religion first, around bearing witness to my faith. But today, on Heretic and Sinner, I'm not here to give you absolute answers. I'm here to tell you how I learned to love my doubts. I'm here to tell you how I went from being a Jehovah's Witness elder, the equivalent of a pastor, to becoming a seeker of truth in uncertainty. My story with religion didn't begin with fanaticism. I come from a curious household. Although my father had Catholic roots and my mother came from a mixed background, both Catholic and Protestant, neither of them actively practiced religion. One thought I remember having as a very young child was, why is there something instead of nothing? Why did God exist? And if God didn't exist, what would exist instead? Maybe you think I wasn't asking the right questions, but keep in mind, these were the questions of a child who wasn't even 10 years old yet. I was educated in Catholic schools, Marist schools to be specific. That's where I first came into contact with the Bible, when they prepared us for First Communion. Sometime later, during one of the usual catechism classes, a teacher talked to us about the Trinity. I don't remember much about the arguments themselves, only the feeling of standing before something incomprehensible. I liked that feeling. Everything changed when I was 11 years old. Someone knocked on the door. They were Jehovah's Witnesses. They offered us a free Bible study, and strangely enough, my mother left the decision up to me. And since 11-year-old children are known for making excellent life decisions, I said yes. What I didn't know was that this yes would shape the next 23 years of my life. And here's something unusual about my experience as a witness. I never left my Catholic school. I even talked to my classmates about my new faith. Looking back, I'm surprised by how tolerant my teachers were, because they never forced me to participate in religious ceremonies. I still attended religion classes, but I participated in them from my own point of view. I became known as the Bible with legs. And I'm also surprised by how tolerant the Jehovah's Witness congregation I attended was with me. I mainly attribute that to the fact that I would tell them how I shared my faith at school, and of course because I didn't participate in religious ceremonies. As you can see, I took my new religion seriously. I got baptized at 15. By 23, I was already a ministerial servant, the equivalent of a deacon, and although back then it was very uncommon for someone to be appointed as an elder before turning 30, I was appointed at 25. However, life is a roller coaster, and at 34, I left the Jehovah's Witness organization. It's curious how, when you become deeply involved in a group, you suppress your doubts. Because in my case, the doubts were always there. One of the very first doubts I remember having, right from the beginning, was about this illustration from the book You Can Live Forever in Paradise on Earth, the book they used to indoctrinate us. I kept wondering, if the Bible says that Jesus will return in the same way the apostles saw him go into heaven, why are they giving me such a convoluted explanation to convince me otherwise? Years later, while studying the book Aid to Bible Understanding, I came across the topic of chronology. What surprised me was that most of the text was dedicated to undermining secular history instead of explaining the subject they were supposedly discussing, biblical chronology. I soon understood why. A very important part of Jehovah's Witness eschatology is the belief that Christ began ruling invisibly in heaven in 1914. For their calculations to work, and for Jesus to have started ruling in 1914, Jerusalem had to have been destroyed in 607 BCE. The problem is that history and archaeology place its fall in either 586 or 587 BCE. To me, the issue became crystal clear just by carefully reading the witnesses' own publications. Years later, after reading Crisis of Conscience by Raymond Franz, a co-writer of Aid to Bible Understanding, who later became a member of the governing body, the organization's highest governing authority, I was able to confirm that my intuition had been correct. Once they realized there was no way to defend 607 BCE, they simply chose to dedicate the article to attacking secular chronology instead. It was my first real encounter with intellectual dishonesty disguised as faith. Then came the absurd policies. While studying old Watchtower magazines, I discovered that for a period of time, Jehovah's Witnesses prohibited organ transplants. They called them cannibalism. And among the many arguments they gave, there was one that was unbelievable. They claimed that a person's emotions literally resided in the physical heart. Therefore, if you received the heart of a worldly person, someone who wasn't a witness, you could inherit that person's sinful tendencies. Eventually, the leaders of the witnesses stopped opposing organ transplants. But I kept wondering, what happened to the people who may have died while that policy was in effect? The arguments were not only absurd, they cost human lives. In the early 1980s, when I started studying with Jehovah's Witnesses, the emphasis was that the end would come before the generation of 1914 passed away. But that generation kept growing older and dying. In 1995, they put a patch on a teaching that could no longer hold together. They began saying that this generation referred to wicked people, the rebellious society under Satan's control. What struck me was how discreetly they presented such a major doctrinal change, hidden away in a single paragraph of the Watchtower. It was obvious they were embarrassed by yet another failed prophecy. Years later, they changed the patch once again. Now they say the generations overlap. It's a concept that no ordinary witness can really explain, and that the governing body keeps alive through mental gymnastics. Not even Nadia Comaneci in her prime was that good at gymnastics. Another thing that caught my attention was the fact that they allowed wedding rings, something they admitted had pagan origins, while at the same time prohibiting birthdays and Christmas for exactly the same reason. It was completely inconsistent. I particularly remember not being able to raise a toast during business dinners. That was also supposedly a pagan custom. Most of the time, it simply wasn't practical to explain why I rejected the gesture, so I just came across as rude. If you were ever one of Jehovah's Witnesses, did that ever happen to you? Let me know in the comments. The final blow came from my work in the pharmaceutical industry, and it came in two different ways. First, because indirectly, I came to understand something about how the organization handled the issue of blood transfusions. I learned that every medication, even something as simple as aspirin, has side effects that pharmaceutical companies are legally required to report, even if they appear in only a tiny percentage of patients. When someone without enough medical knowledge reads the full list of possible side effects for even the simplest medicine, they often become frightened because the lists are usually very long and include effects that occur only in extremely rare cases, while the benefits overwhelmingly outweigh the risks. But a good salesman knows how to use those side effects to attack the competition while promoting his own product. I realized that the leaders of Jehovah's Witnesses did exactly the same thing with blood. In their brochures, they highlight the risks of transfusions with such exaggeration and alarmism that they convince people blood doesn't save lives, but destroys them instead. They were applying the exact same strategy they once used with organ transplants, the very same transplants they barely even mention today. All of these inconsistencies had always been there. They were doubts that surfaced during moments of clarity, only for me to avoid feeding them afterward, because doing so meant accepting that my entire life might have been built on a lie. Fortunately, my professional career gave me the permission I needed to begin thinking independently. The second way my work delivered the final blow to my connection with Jehovah's Witnesses was that it became incredibly demanding. Eventually, there simply wasn't enough time for me to fulfill both my professional responsibilities and my obligations within the congregation. I had to choose between my career and continuing to attend meetings regularly. I chose the first option. Stopping my regular attendance at Jehovah's Witness meetings gave me the emotional distance I needed to finally think for myself with complete freedom. Time passed, and one day I decided to start a new life. I submitted my letter of disassociation to the Jehovah's Witness organization. Did it make any sense to continue being part of something I no longer believed in? Today, my faith is no longer in the answers provided by an organization, but in the honest search for answers. If this journey through doubt resonates with you, subscribe to Heretic and Sinner. Here, we explore the Bible and religion through the lens of academic rigor. I take what biblical scholars study and transform it into clear and accessible content through short videos, never boring, but always grounded in academic research. Because sometimes, doubt is the most honest act of faith there is. Thank you for listening to my story. See you soon.